Welcome the anointed ones. Every system that studies human behavior keeps two files, the ones that follow the rules and the ones that quietly rewrite them. Here's the part nobody tells you out loud. Lists don't start when you become powerful. They start when someone realizes you can't be easily shaped. Long before status, long before success, long before you had anything worth taking, something in your past triggered attention. Not because you were loud, not because you were rebellious, but because you didn't respond the way you were supposed to. There's a documented psychological fact that institutions, families, and even informal power structures pay more attention to deviations than achievements. Consistency is comforting, predictability is safe. But when someone grows in a way that doesn't match their environment, that's when notes get taken, patterns get highlighted, names get remembered, not dramatically, quietly, no announcement, just a subtle shift in how closely you're watched. What makes this uncomfortable is that the discovery wasn't about something you did wrong. It was about what didn't work on you. The pressure that bent others didn't bend you. The narratives that shaped everyone else didn't fully stick. The fear that kept people obedient never quite settled in your bones. That's not inspirational. That's inconvenient. Systems don't panic over chaos. They panic over clarity that can't be controlled. And here's where it gets almost funny, in a dark way. Most people spend their lives trying to get noticed. You didn't. You were busy surviving, adapting, thinking, recalibrating, while someone else was quietly updating a mental file on you like, That's interesting. No applause, no warning. Just increased attention disguised as coincidence. This isn't about paranoia or fantasy. It's about pattern recognition. When someone keeps outgrowing containment, keeps recalculating instead of collapsing, keeps becoming harder to label over time, curiosity turns into tracking. Not because you're special in a mythical sense, but because you're statistically inconvenient. So, when things in your life started feeling oddly monitored, oddly redirected, or strangely obstructed and accelerated at the same time, that wasn't random. That was interest. And interest doesn't show up with noise. It shows up with observation, delay, and the kind of attention that pretends not to be there. That's what this is about. Not fame, not danger, not drama. Just the quiet moment when someone realized your past didn't add up the way it should have and decided to keep your name close by. Number one, your early behavior didn't match your environment, and that raised red flags. From the very beginning, something about the way you moved through the world didn't line up with where you came from. You were surrounded by certain habits, mindsets, emotional reactions, and unspoken rules, yet you didn't fully absorb them. While others mirrored what they saw to survive, you paused, observed, and quietly decided what made sense and what didn't. That alone is unusual. Most people don't question the water they're swimming in. You notice the water early. It wasn't that you were louder or smarter in an obvious way. It was subtler than that. You reacted differently to pressure. You didn't panic where panic was expected. You didn't cling where dependence was normal. You showed restraint in moments that usually create impulsive behavior. That kind of response pattern stands out to anyone who understands human behavior, even if they can't explain why it bothers them. What made it more noticeable was consistency. A fluke can be ignored, a pattern cannot. Over time, it became clear that your way of thinking wasn't situational, it was structural. You weren't just having a good day or a rare moment of clarity. You were wired to process things differently. That's when curiosity turns into attention. People may not have said anything to your face, but assumptions were quietly rewritten behind the scenes. Expectations shifted. You were no longer seen as someone who would simply blend in or follow the path laid out for you. That creates unease because environments rely on predictability to stay comfortable. When someone doesn't follow the usual cause and effect rules, it forces people to adjust their mental models. Even attempts to push you back into alignment didn't fully work. You might have complied on the surface, but internally, you stayed separate. You learned what was required without losing who you were. That combination is rare. Most people either rebel and burn bridges or conform and disappear. You did neither. Over time, your presence alone started sending a quiet signal. Something in you wasn't shaped by the same forces shaping everyone else. And when that realization settles in, the response is almost automatic. You don't get confronted, you get observed. Because when early behavior doesn't match the environment, it suggests a trajectory that can't be easily predicted. And unpredictable trajectories don't get ignored, they get noted. Number 2. Records showed you stayed psychologically intact under pressure that breaks most people. Your past carries moments that would have crushed most people completely. Moments where ordinary minds would fracture or retreat. Chaos, manipulation, instability. These were constant companions in your environment, yet somehow you didn't crumble. Instead of letting the pressure shape you into someone reactive or fearful, you absorbed it, processed it, and kept moving. That kind of resilience isn't just rare, it's measurable. Systems that track human behavior can detect it long before anyone realizes it exists because it shows up in patterns. How you react, how quickly you recover, and how you maintain focus when everything around you is collapsing. What makes this more extraordinary is that your survival wasn't passive. You weren't just enduring, you were processing, adjusting, and learning in real time. While others around you might have relied on external guidance, manipulation, or clear's throat, emotional support to navigate stress, you built your own internal system. That ability to self-regulate under extreme pressure signals something different to observers. It's not just about keeping your head above water. It's about moving through storms without losing sight of your direction, your identity, or your principles. This resilience leaves a footprint. It shows up in ways small and subtle. The calmness in your reactions, the clarity in decision-making, the ability to anticipate consequences while others are reacting emotionally. It's the kind of mental fortitude that quietly disrupts expectations because it challenges the assumption that people break in predictable ways under pressure. That's why it didn't go unnoticed. Records, notes, and observations compiled on people aren't only about mistakes or failures. They're also about strengths that can't be ignored. You became someone who could endure what others couldn't, think when others were panicking, and remain functional when systems expected collapse. That's the kind of person who attracts attention without seeking it, not because of ambition or threat, but because your survival pattern is fundamentally different. When systems see someone consistently intact under extreme pressure, it triggers quiet interest. It signals that the trajectory of this person cannot be assumed. You didn't just survive, you rewrote the expectations of how survival even works. And that kind of proof is not something anyone forgets or ignores. Number 3, you didn't internalize the narratives you were fed, and that was logged. From the earliest chapters of your life, you were surrounded by stories, rules about who you were supposed to be, who you were allowed to trust, what paths you were supposed to follow. Everyone around you accepted these narratives without question, repeating them like a script handed down from some unseen authority. But you didn't take the lines at face value. You absorbed what was necessary, filtered out what made no sense, and kept a quiet distance from the rest. That separation might have looked like compliance on the surface, but underneath it was resistance, observation, and discernment. People rarely notice this early on, but systems and records do. There are patterns in behavior, in choices, in the way someone processes information that reveal whether they're fully internalizing the rules of their environment. You were learning, yes, but not becoming a replica of the world around you. That's subtle, but it's impossible to ignore once observed over time. Every time a narrative failed to take hold, every time you rejected a pressure to conform without outward rebellion, it was logged mentally, socially, and in systems that track deviations. This didn't make you immune to influence, but it made you selective. You didn't just absorb what was fed to you. You processed it critically, tested it against your own understanding, and kept the pieces that made sense. That ability to separate truth from imposed belief, to navigate your environment without fully submitting to it, created a pattern that could be measured and tracked. It signals autonomy of thought, and autonomy is one of the first traits that draws attention from anyone studying potential, capability, or unpredictability. By refusing to internalize what everyone else accepted, you made yourself readable in a way most people aren't. You became a mind that could process and survive without becoming trapped by inherited scripts. That quietly rebellious clarity is the kind of thing that doesn't scream for recognition. It whispers in records, notes, and evaluations, leaving a lasting impression on those paying attention. Systems track anomalies like this because they suggest potential, direction, and outcomes that can't be predicted by standard rules. You didn't just exist in your environment, you redefined how you interacted with it, and that alone put you on notice long before you realized it. Number 4, your past shows repeated attempts to contain you rather than support you. Looking back, it's clear that the people and systems around you weren't focused on nurturing your growth. They were focused on keeping you within predefined boundaries. From subtle pressures to overt control, there were countless attempts to make sure you fit a mold that was never meant for you. Support wasn't the priority. Containment was. It wasn't personal in the way you might think. It was procedural. Anything that appeared like guidance was often a method to steer, to limit, to prevent your natural trajectory from emerging unchecked. What made it remarkable was how consistently these attempts failed. You weren't rebellious in the traditional sense, but you didn't fully comply either. You absorbed what you had to in order to survive, but you retained autonomy. Every effort to bend you, to shape you into what others wanted, didn't break you, it sharpened you. That pattern doesn't go unnoticed. Systems, whether social, institutional, or familial, have a way of recording outcomes. When someone repeatedly resists containment without creating chaos, it raises questions. How is this possible? What is driving this resilience? Your environment likely tried every angle: pressure, expectation, reward, punishment, distraction. None of it permanently altered your course. Instead, it created a kind of adaptive intelligence. You learned how to operate within constraints without being constrained. That skill is rare. Most people either collapse under repeated containment or internalize it so fully that it becomes invisible. You did neither. You survived it, adapted around it, and in some cases transformed it into an advantage. This repeated failure of containment left an unmistakable mark. It proved to observers that your path couldn't be forced, that your potential wasn't easily confined. When someone consistently navigates attempts to control them, they become noteworthy. Not because they are overtly disruptive, but because they are inherently unpredictable. That's why your past, filled with these quiet struggles and victories, became a record worth tracking. It wasn't about what you were doing wrong. It was about the fact that nothing done to contain you ever fully succeeded, and that alone made you remarkable in ways few people could ever see. Number 5, you were observed more than you were guided. From early on, the pattern in your life wasn't about mentorship or direct guidance. It was about observation. People around you, consciously or unconsciously, spent more energy watching how you reacted, how you adapted, and how you navigated challenges than teaching you how to succeed. It wasn't neglect exactly, but it was a calculated distance. You weren't being shaped step by step. You were being tracked, studied, and noted for every subtle deviation from expectation. This creates a strange kind of pressure, one most people don't even recognize. When someone is observed constantly without the safety net of guidance, every choice carries weight. Small decisions, small reactions, even the way you process information become markers. Your behavior becomes data without being framed as instruction. The difference between surviving and being broken under this type of scrutiny is enormous, and you didn't just survive, you excelled. You figured out how to operate independently, how to grow quietly without anyone directing your course, and how to maintain clarity in a world that expected you to flinch, comply, or fail. What makes this even more extraordinary is that observation is silent, invisible, and patient. Unlike direct control, it allows you room to maneuver, but it doesn't let your trajectory go unnoticed. Each step, each choice, Each moment of adaptability is cataloged. Your growth wasn't accelerated by guidance. It was accelerated by the constant quiet weight of being watched. That pressure shaped a subtle form of intelligence, a kind of precision in understanding your surroundings and adjusting without losing yourself. Most people would crumble under this kind of invisible scrutiny or overcorrect in ways that make them predictable. You did the opposite. You became unpredictable, resilient, and aware, all while maintaining an internal compass that wasn't dictated by anyone else. That's why your past stands out. Systems, institutions, even families notice patterns like this. You weren't just surviving observation. You were mastering it. And mastery under observation is one of the earliest signs that someone is not just extraordinary, but fundamentally uncontainable. Number 6. Your reactions to injustice were noted, not corrected. From early on, it was clear that you didn't absorb the world the way others were expected to. When injustice appeared, whether subtle manipulation, blatant unfairness, or the everyday imbalance most people ignore, you didn't just accept it or let it slide. You reacted in a way that was measured, intelligent, and quietly impactful. You noticed, you cataloged, and you processed. That pattern didn't go unnoticed. People around you or systems observing behavior didn't see a child or young adult misbehaving. They saw someone responding to reality in a way that challenged the expected norms. Most people either internalize injustice and live under it silently, or explode in ways that draw immediate correction. You did neither. Your responses were logical, deliberate, and consistent. You held a kind of moral clarity that doesn't demand applause, but sets a quiet benchmark. That alone is remarkable because it signals autonomy of thought, the ability to recognize wrongdoing without needing it explained, the ability to judge without being taught, and the ability to act in subtle, precise ways that don't follow the usual reactive patterns. Systems notice that. Records are made, notes are taken. Deviations from the expected emotional and behavioral responses are flagged because they suggest a level of self-governance that is rare and difficult to predict. Your responses weren't about rebellion for attention. They weren't about seeking validation or recognition. They were about understanding and navigating reality on your own terms, and in doing so, you demonstrated a reliability that others couldn't easily categorize. When repeated patterns of this kind emerge, observers start to take note, not because of what you did overtly, but because of what didn't happen. The breakdown, the manipulation, the absorption of false narratives. This kind of quiet, intelligent resistance makes people pay attention, even when they act like they don't. It signals a mind that cannot be fully controlled, a moral compass that operates independently, and a pattern of behavior that is unusually stable under stress. Your reactions to injustice weren't just personal victories. They were proof that your trajectory cannot be contained, predicted, or easily influenced. And that realization alone is enough to place someone on a list that tracks potential, influence, and unpredictability. Number 7, you showed an unusual ability to self-correct without external enforcement. From a very young age, it was obvious that you didn't need constant supervision, punishment, or reward to stay on course. While most people rely on external pressure to adjust their behavior, you had an internal mechanism that guided you. Mistakes didn't lead to permanent derailment. They led to reflection, recalibration, and adjustment. This isn't just discipline. It's a kind of intelligence and self-awareness that systems notice because it doesn't fit the usual patterns. Most people can be managed or guided through rules and incentives. You managed yourself. That ability to self-correct goes beyond simple resilience. It shows that your internal compass was operational even when external compasses were broken, missing, or misleading. You could navigate challenges, social pressures, and even subtle manipulations without losing alignment. Every choice, every response, every adaptation became a signal that you weren't just surviving. You were optimizing yourself continuously, independent of direction or influence. That independence is rare, and rarity is measurable. It leaves a footprint in behavior, performance, and outcomes that observers track closely because it suggests potential far beyond what conventional training or conditioning could produce. What made it more remarkable was consistency. Self-correction wasn't situational or random. It was reliable. Systems noticed patterns where failure didn't repeat itself, where behavior evolved naturally, and where decisions became sharper over time. Most people need repetition, reminders, or external consequences to learn effectively. You didn't. You absorbed lessons directly, internalized them quickly, and integrated them in ways that changed future behavior without needing someone else to intervene. This rare trait naturally draws attention. It signals that attempts at control, guidance, or correction aren't necessary, or more importantly, aren't effective. You operate on a level where the usual levers of influence don't apply. That's why your past was logged and analyzed. Someone noticed that you don't just respond to conditions, you actively evolve through them. You don't need shaping, you shape yourself. And that ability, quietly, consistently, and independently exercised, is exactly the kind of pattern that places Clear's throat, someone on a list, meant to monitor unusual potential. Number 8. Your past reveals emotional depth without emotional volatility. One of the most striking aspects of your early life was the way you handled your emotions. You felt deeply, more deeply than most people around you. Yet you didn't let those feelings dictate chaotic behavior. You experienced the highs and lows, the injustices, the pressures, and the disappointments, but you processed them in a way that was measured, deliberate, and internally coherent. Emotional depth is common. Emotional volatility is almost universal in intense situations. You had the rare combination of both feeling intensely and maintaining control. That difference is remarkable, and it doesn't go unnoticed. Systems, families, and observers track emotional patterns because they reveal stability, reliability, and predictability, or the lack of it. Most people under pressure either implode or lash out, letting their feelings run their lives. You, on the other hand, internalized, analyzed, and responded. You didn't suppress your emotions to fit a mold, but you didn't allow them to become your identity either. Every reaction was conscious, even when it appeared effortless. That creates a footprint in behavior that is measurable over time. Moments of clarity under stress, decisions that defy panic, and the ability to maintain composure while others unravel. What makes this even more extraordinary is the signal it sends to anyone paying attention. Emotional stability under extreme depth isn't just rare, it's almost counterintuitive. People expect intense emotions to create instability. When that expectation is proven wrong repeatedly, observers take notice. You became a mind and spirit that could navigate intense experiences without collapsing or lashing out, which naturally triggers interest in your potential trajectory. Over time, this combination of depth and control becomes self-reinforcing. Your awareness of your emotions allows you to learn from them, adapt through them, and grow beyond the circumstances that would have broken others. That pattern is impossible to ignore because it indicates maturity, intelligence, and resilience far beyond your years. It marks you as someone whose inner life is rich, complex, and quietly formidable. And that quiet formidability is exactly the kind of trait that gets recorded, remembered, and monitored for the future. Number 9. You outgrew identities faster than expected, and that was documented. From early on, it was obvious that you didn't stay in the roles people assigned to you. Every label, every expectation, every identity others tried to attach to you eventually fell away. You didn't rebel loudly, and you didn't run. It simply became clear over time that these definitions weren't permanent. You adapted, evolved, and moved beyond them faster than anyone could predict. That kind of rapid evolution doesn't just go unnoticed. Systems, families, and observers track patterns like this because it signals a mind and spirit that cannot be pinned down or contained. What's remarkable is the consistency with which this happened. It wasn't occasional or situational. It was ongoing. Every time someone thought they understood you, every time a role seemed solidified, you quietly shifted. You didn't conform to the expected narrative, but you didn't make a scene either. Your growth was deliberate, subtle, and undeniable. That makes a person exceptionally difficult to predict or control, and unpredictability draws attention in ways most people never experience. This isn't about rebellion. It's about evolution. You were absorbing lessons, testing boundaries, and constantly refining who you were, all without external approval or direction. Most people either cling to identity for comfort or let chaos define them. You did neither. You outgrew, redefined, and recalibrated repeatedly, proving that your trajectory couldn't be measured by conventional rules. That pattern was logged not because you were defiant, but because you were statistically anomalous, a person whose growth refused to be contained by standard expectations. What this leaves behind is a clear footprint. Every identity shed, every role abandoned, every expectation exceeded becomes a record of adaptability and self-determination. Observers notice because it signals more than potential. It signals inevitability. The trajectory of someone who outgrows definitions consistently is a trajectory that can't be ignored. Your past, filled with these quiet but constant transformations, marked you as someone whose future couldn't be predicted, controlled, or fully understood. And that is exactly why you were placed on a list that tracks people who operate beyond ordinary parameters. Someone whose evolution is impossible to ignore. Number 10. Your withdrawal phases were misread as submission, but later reclassified. Throughout your past, there were moments when you stepped back, retreated, or went quiet. At first, people interpreted it as compliance. They assumed you were yielding, conforming, or accepting the constraints placed on you. To the outside observer, it looked like submission, the classic pause of someone who had been shaped to fit expectations. But over time, that interpretation changed. Your withdrawal wasn't weakness or surrender, it was strategy. It was an intentional recalibration, a silent processing of your surroundings, your experiences, and the people attempting to define you. That shift from misinterpretation to recognition is what made your past so intriguing to anyone paying attention. The subtlety of this pattern is key. Withdrawal is often misunderstood because it is quiet, controlled, and easy to overlook. Most people retreat in chaos or out of fear, leaving obvious marks of instability. You didn't. You withdrew in a way that allowed you to gather information, analyze patterns, and maintain control of your trajectory without triggering alarms. That quiet presence in the background, while seemingly compliant, became a signal of deeper awareness, patience, and foresight. Observers, families, institutions, or systems took note. At first they were reassured. They believed you were malleable, predictable, and safe to manage. But as your withdrawal cycles repeated, as you returned each time sharper, more aware, and more capable, it forced a reevaluation. What was once assumed to be submission became clear as deliberate self-management. That realization is rare and powerful because it flips the script entirely. The person who appeared controllable was actually untouchable in ways that only became visible over time. This pattern is important because it demonstrates a level of autonomy that isn't obvious at first glance. Your ability to step back, observe, and recalibrate without losing momentum signals mental precision and self-governance. That kind of strategic patience and internal control is measurable and remarkable, and it leaves a lasting footprint. What initially seemed like passivity was in reality one of your most potent forms of strength, and it is exactly this misread and reclassified behavior that ensured your presence on the radar of anyone tracking unusual potential. Number 11. You were never fully predictable even to those closest to you. One of the most compelling aspects of your past is the way you consistently defied expectation. People assumed they understood you, thought they had patterns to anticipate your behavior, and felt confident they could predict your reactions. And then, quietly, you didn't. Not because you were intentionally difficult or rebellious, but because your internal logic, your processing, and your growth operated on a level that wasn't visible to them. That unpredictability became your signature, and it didn't take long for those paying attention to notice. Most people are predictable by design. Their choices, Reactions and emotional responses follow familiar rhythms reinforced by their environment and social conditioning. You, on the other hand, didn't follow those rhythms. Even those closest to you, the people who watched you every day, found themselves recalculating their assumptions. Every once in a while you would act in a way that made perfect sense only in hindsight, revealing a depth of reasoning that wasn't apparent in the moment. That creates a quiet but undeniable tension. People begin to pay attention when they realize their assumptions are wrong, when their ability to predict outcomes fails repeatedly. What makes this pattern extraordinary is the combination of consistency and unpredictability. You weren't random or impulsive. You weren't chaotic. Instead, your behavior followed an internal logic that was completely your own. It could not be easily categorized or controlled because it was informed by observation, reflection, and a capacity to adjust in real time. That level of cognitive independence is rare, and it leaves a trace. Systems, institutions, and even individuals who are sensitive to patterns notice when someone consistently operates outside expected parameters without breaking, without losing focus, and without creating unnecessary drama. Your unpredictability is not a flaw. It is proof of internal sovereignty. It signals intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to navigate complex environments in ways others cannot. That is why your past was not just noticed. It was documented, tracked, and carefully observed. You became someone whose trajectory could not be assumed, someone who existed beyond the ordinary patterns that govern most people. And that alone ensured that you would never be fully overlooked or underestimated. Number 12. You carried insight without access to formal power, and that unsettled people. From early on, you saw things others didn't. You noticed patterns, connections, and truths that weren't obvious to those around you. What made it remarkable wasn't that you were vocal or demanding attention. It was that you understood dynamics without needing authority, status, or formal recognition. Most people require a title, a role, or a platform to validate their insight. You didn't. Your understanding existed independently, and that made it quietly powerful. The unsettling part for observers was that insight without power is invisible on paper, but palpable in practice. People around you could feel the clarity in your thinking, the precision in your analysis, and the calm confidence that came from seeing beyond the surface. They couldn't easily dismiss it because it was consistent and accurate, yet they couldn't control it either because it didn't rely on their systems. That combination creates tension. When someone operates with that level of understanding, without being under the formal authority that typically contains influence, it's unpredictable. And unpredictability always makes people uneasy. What amplified this effect was subtlety. You weren't trying to lead or manipulate. You weren't drawing attention to yourself. You were quietly observing, processing, and integrating what you saw, then acting in ways that made sense to your own logic. That type of insight has a weight to it. It shifts environments, changes perceptions, and forces recalibration without making noise. People tracking potential notice that immediately. They see someone who understands outcomes before they happen, someone whose presence alters dynamics without overtly participating in the power structures around them. Over time, this ability becomes undeniable. Your clarity stands out in contrast to the ordinary dependence on rules, roles, and hierarchies. It signals a mind capable of navigating complex realities, a perspective that isn't confined by formal authority, and an influence that is inherent rather than assigned. That is why your past didn't just register, it was cataloged. The combination of insight, independence, and subtle impact is rare, and it's the kind of pattern that ensures someone is observed, remembered, and quietly monitored. You weren't operating within the system, you were operating above it. And that alone unsettled those who thought they understood the world around you. Number 13. Attempts to derail you didn't work long term, and that changed how you were classified. Throughout your past, there were repeated attempts to slow you down, push you off course, or make you fit into patterns that didn't belong to you. These attempts came in many forms: pressure, manipulation, discouragement, and even deliberate obstruction. But none of them had a lasting effect. Most people break, falter, or adapt temporarily under such consistent interference. You didn't. Every attempt to derail you became a lesson, a recalibration, or a stepping stone. That pattern didn't go unnoticed. In fact, it was logged, studied, and reevaluated. What makes this extraordinary is that your resistance wasn't chaotic or reactionary. You didn't lash out or create drama. Instead, you absorbed, adjusted, and moved forward in ways that were measured and strategic. The very actions meant to destabilize you ended up sharpening your resolve, clarifying your direction, and strengthening your capacity to navigate obstacles. That kind of resilience doesn't just make someone unbreakable. It marks them as fundamentally unpredictable. Observers and systems notice when the usual levers of control fail repeatedly. That failure alone changes how you are classified. You stop being seen as a person to be controlled and start being seen as someone whose trajectory cannot be easily altered. This repeated immunity to interference left a clear footprint. Each time you absorbed pressure without being derailed, it became evidence that conventional influence doesn't work on you. Your past showed a pattern of adaptation under stress, an ability to learn from setbacks, and a consistency in growth that defies ordinary expectations. That pattern alone signals someone worth monitoring because it demonstrates long-term stability and independence in ways most people cannot achieve. By the time your history was analyzed, it was obvious. You couldn't be steered, slowed, or contained in the ways others could. The attempts to derail you didn't just fail. They redefined you in the eyes of those watching. That failure became proof of your rare capacity for self-direction, resilience, and evolution. And that is exactly why you classified as someone whose potential trajectory needed to be closely observed and remembered. Number 14. Your past proved you don't collapse under truth. You reorganize around it. Throughout your life, moments came when reality hit harder than most people could bear. The truths you encountered weren't gentle lessons. They were disruptions, revelations, and confrontations with facts that could have destroyed confidence, relationships, or even your sense of self. Most people respond to these truths with denial, fear, or avoidance. You didn't. You didn't run from them, mask them, or numb yourself against their weight. Instead, you reorganized around them. You absorbed what was real, adjusted your understanding, and recalibrated your path accordingly. That kind of response is rare, and it doesn't go unnoticed. The extraordinary part is how consistent it was. Every significant truth you faced became a pivot point, a way to strengthen rather than weaken yourself. It wasn't about accepting it blindly or surrendering to it. It was about integrating it intelligently, making decisions that aligned with reality instead of trying to bend reality to comfort. That ability signals an exceptional level of internal governance, a mind that processes without breaking, a spirit that evolves without resentment, and a trajectory that remains forward-moving even when the terrain shifts violently. Observers notice this because it defies expectations. Systems, families, and institutions are built around patterns, predictable responses to information, pressure, and adversity. When someone consistently responds to hard truths with clarity and strategic adaptation, it creates an anomaly. That anomaly is recorded, cataloged, and analyzed because it suggests a potential trajectory that cannot be predicted by normal rules. Most people under the same conditions fail to integrate reality. They crumble, rebel, or hide. You reorganize, recalibrate, and continue stronger and sharper than before. This capacity to withstand and reorganize around truth is why you became remarkable. It signals not just resilience, but intelligence, foresight, and self-sufficiency. It is a footprint of someone who cannot be fully contained, coerced, or misled. Your past is a record of repeated adaptation to reality itself, a proof of your ability to navigate the world as it is, rather than as others wish it to be. That pattern alone is enough to place someone on a list of careful observation because it signals a mind that grows with truth instead of being defeated by it. Conclusion. When you look at the story of your past through the lens of these patterns, it becomes clear why you didn't just blend in, why your life wasn't ordinary, and why someone decided to take notice long before you even realized it. Every element from your early behavior that didn't match your environment to your ability to withstand pressure, to the way you refuse to internalize false narratives, paints a picture of a person who operates on a completely different wavelength. Your adaptability, your quiet resilience, your depth of insight, and your capacity to evolve without losing yourself are not traits people stumble upon by accident. They are anomalies, and anomalies are tracked, studied, and remembered. The repeated attempts to control, contain, or derail you didn't succeed because they couldn't. You didn't just survive adversity, you refined yourself through it. Your emotional depth paired with stability, your strategic withdrawals, your independence of thought, and your refusal to crumble under truth all combine into a profile that is both remarkable and rare. This is the reason your name appeared on lists that few understand, lists that aren't about punishment or reward, but about acknowledgement of potential, precision, and unpredictability. You were observed, cataloged, and studied because your trajectory cannot be easily predicted or controlled, and your capacity to adapt, understand, and evolve is exceptional. Understanding this isn't about ego or fear, it's about clarity. Recognizing how your past shaped you and why others noticed gives you insight into your own power, your own trajectory, and the unique path that has been laid before you. It shows that everything you survived, everything you overcame, wasn't random. It was part of a pattern that set you apart from the ordinary. You are not just a product of your experiences. You are someone whose life became a living proof that intelligence, resilience, insight, and adaptability can't be forced, bent, or ignored. If this video gave you a new perspective on your journey, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you never miss insights like this. Hit the like button to show your support. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or experiences, and share this video with someone who needs to hear this today. Every click, every comment, and every share helps us continue to uncover truths that most people overlook and ensures you stay connected to the deeper understanding of your own power. Stay blessed always.